Moving on from the cheek then, we'll take a look at the nose. Now this is particularly interesting and it starts to get a little fiddly in here, and we also start to see some reflection of issues that really do permeate face rigs as a whole. So even though this is going to be in many ways quite a simple little thing, it should be very instructive. So you can see what I've got here is I've just got a little bone in the nose, right? And surprise, surprise, I've created a nose weight map here, which is, just feathered out a little bit on the top edges, along here, sort of soften it off, and of course around the, underside where the nose ends there. But it does, encompass the whole of the bulb, the fleshy part of the nose. Obviously, this bit of the nose up here, that doesn't really tend to move because that's got a bone underneath it. The skin can slide over it, and maybe that's something that we can look to, but for the main principal part, we're not worrying too much about that, at least for the time being. Now, one of the difficulties with this, of course, if we just take a look at the nose bone here and we just rotate it and see its action, well, it's it's pulling the whole of the nose bulb with it, right? It's pulling it away from the face. The wings of the nose and the backside are coming away, which isn't quite what we want. Now, we could try and feather out the weight map and, soften it off so as these vertices are affected less. But one thing that we do also want to have is individual control on each of these side wings. So if we bring in a nose left and right bone here, and these guys can just have the same weight map of nose, but let's give them 50% strength. Then what we see, of course, is they act as hold bones, right? So as now, when we're moving, we're really just pulling the tip and we're getting this soft, softened fall off into the other parts of the nose there, which is nice. But what we also have is control, where we can, do these little curls on the nose wing like that, or of course we can also just sort of nudge them about for doing all of that sort of stuff, which is great. So we want to give some control for this, obviously enough. The question then of how we want to control the nose isn't actually such a straightforward answer, because much of the time, almost all the time, we don't really want to control it, at least not directly. Try it out with your own face. Some people can, pinch their nose or wiggle it around or whatnot, and, some people are better at it than others. But the thing is, no matter how much, movement you've got in your nose tip there, what you never really see is it moving in isolation, at least not on a human face. It's always the product of some other motion. So really, you never actually control your nose. Rather, you distort other parts of your face, pull them, pinch them, whatever, and the nose sort of gets dragged around with them. For instance, let's put on sticky lips, right, and, pull the jaw open like this. Try this movement yourself and, touch your nose as you're doing it, and you feel your nose gets dragged down a little bit, it gets sort of mushed down somewhat when you perform that move. Alternatively, try the good old smile that you perform here. Not just a light one, really, pull your face up, really squeeze your cheek. The nose wing on that side sort of goes up as well. Of course, you don't have to smile to do a sneer. You can just sort of, pinch your nose up, which of course involves your cheek muscle up here over the cheekbone pulling and bulging, and the nasolabial fold bit goes up here, and of course, along with it, up goes your nose wing like that. That's how you make a sneer move, right? So what we're actually going to be doing with the nose is building in a whole bunch of automation between multiple controls for multiple situations. And this is easier and simpler than trying to put in control for the nose and then build in secondary controls to other things. So we don't want to have a control to do this and then have some effect that makes this produce a sneer move along with it. We want the nose to follow other things rather than other things to follow it. It's tidier that way, it's more compact, and whilst there's still a wee bit of setup involved here, it's going to be much easier to keep track of. So first thing then, well, where we've got these nose bones put in, you can see that of course they're rotated to some different values here. Since you're going to be wanting to push them from these base positions in some way or other, the easiest thing is just to base them so as they're all zeroed. So I'm going to just clone the nose here. I'll call it the nose root and parent the nose to it. I'll do the same for the left and right bones here, so each of those gets a little root clone. Okay, and these roots, we can just take their rest length down. Not that it's particularly important, but I just find it helpful for a tidiness point of view and make sure that their strengths are set to 0 so they're not doing anything. So now of course all of our actual nose bones have rotation and position 0. Now the order that we're going to set these up in, it doesn't really matter. It would be nice to have an orderly way to go through that was perhaps a bit more straightforward, as it were, but there isn't really such an easy thing to do. So we'll just go through it and build it, and you'll see it coming together as we do that. So first of all, I'm going to deal with the nose wing and the sneer action that we get when pushing this null. So this null here at the first NASLab, that can control our sneer effect. Okay, how high do I want to push it? I think at most, it's bring it up to say 120 millimeters. I can't imagine needing to go much higher. And we might also want to come down a bit. I don't think much more than about negative 60 millimeters. So we can choose that as our limit. Of course, if you're wanting to fix this in, then you could put, motion limits on the position here. That's entirely up to you. So let's start out with this thing 120 millimeters up. Okay, and what do we want the nose wing here to do? Well, I want it to rotate up, let's say to about this much. Let's say, actually, what's that? Negative 19. Let's make it a nice round neg 20, shall we? If you try it with your own nose, you'll find that it tends to, stretch a little bit as well. So I'm going to stretch it slightly on the Z. How much by? Not an awful amount, awfully huge amount. Maybe 1.07, something like that. And I'm also just going to lift it up by a little scotch. Again, not by very much at all. What is that like? That's 1 millimeter, a whole 1 millimeter. So quite a small move there. Since we are going to have multiple things affecting, we want to be able to add all of these effects on top of one another, have all of these motions add up, right? So again, the best way to do that is going to be to go nodal. So let's come over to our motion options and we'll add a nodal motion onto this bone. What am I going to want then? Well, I'm going to want the info for that, NASLab, top, sneer, whatever we want to call it, item there. So let's get the item info for it. Okay, and we'll just look it up here. And that's the NASLab 1 left that we're grabbing. There it is. We're interested in its Y position. So we get a vector scalar to break its position and grab just the Y channel. And then, of course, similar to what we've done before, we're going to want to drive a gradient with that. So we'll plug that to the input of our gradient. Right, now we're going to positive and negative territory, so let's just set the range on our gradient like that. This is 0, so of course when the controller is at 0. This controller was based, of course, it had a base underneath it, so it was in its base position. As you see here, it's at 0, 0, 0. So that's our initial input, is 0 here. And what does that equate to? Well, first of all, we're going to deal with the rotation, okay? So this will be our rotation gradient. That's going to want to have rotation 0, so pop that there as the alpha. We're going to use the alpha as the output again. Then we're wanting a position key. Oh, at 120 millimeters. Look at that, I was very close. That's 0.12, of course, 0.12 meters. And the output for that is going to want to be negative 20 degrees. Don't forget, we need to output a radians value. So what we've got to do is we've got to take 20 degrees, convert that into radians, and then convert that into a percentage value where 100% equals 1 radian. We could just, do the bit of math, but the easiest thing to do this is just going to be, let's just plug the alpha straight into the rotation here. Obviously our guy goes back to 0. And let's grab this and just wind it up until we get a value. We can read it out down here in the channel box, okay, of 20 degrees, or close enough to 20 degrees. Come on. 20.05, great. It wanted to be negative, so negative. Bingo. So that sorted that. What's the next that we're going to want? Well, we're going to want a negative 40 millimeters, aren't we? So that's negative 0.04. Right, that key's a little tight, so I'm just going to shrink this down. Negative 0.2, and I'll just set the max here to 0.2, just so I can see my keys spaced a bit better. And we'll come back and we'll do that negative 40 in a second. First of all, I'll just take care of the scale. So let's just copy and paste our gradient here, plug in the same input to it. Now, what was our scale going to be? 1.07, right? So at this position of 120 millimeters, it's going to be 107%. Simple as that. And of course, if we plug the alpha straight into our scale, there we see they all jump to 1.07. So that's grand. Right, let's just reset the value for that guy. The last thing we wanted was, of course, position. So let's copy and paste our gradient again. Okay, so we've got pos, rot, and scale happening here. And what was the position? It was 1 whole millimeter, wasn't it? So plug the input there. Here at the 120 position, we want 1 millimeter, of course, times 100. 1 millimeter is 0.1% of a meter. 1/10 of 1% of a meter is a millimeter. And of course we can double check that by plugging to position, and we see, oh, look at that, close enough, almost a millimeter. Great, so let's start putting these vectors together for this up position. So what have we got? We were raising up on y, weren't we, for the position, so there's that. And x and z we want to maintain at 0, so we can now plug that straight to position. And we see that when moving that, the position is now responding. For the rotation, we were wanting to affect just the pitch, weren't we? This thing was raising up on its pitch there, so let's plug that to the y here. Again, the x and z, which would be the heading and bank, are wanting to remain at 0, so we can plug that to rotation. And then for the scale, we were wanting to scale it out on the z, where the x and the y, of course, wish to be 1. We can plug that to scale. Now, we do straight away have a bit of a bother, because as we come down, look what happens to our bone. It shrinks away to absolutely nothing. Why? Because of course this gradient represents scale, and here at the 0 position we've got 0. Of course that wants to be scale 1, or 100% scaling. So we change that there, and that's now working nicely. There's our little bone rotating, scaling, and doing what it does. Now, one of the other things that we might want to do on scale, of course, since it is stretching in one direction, we might want to squish it in another, and usually that will be here on the y, right? We would want to squish the y as the, let me just disconnect the scale for a moment, we would want to squish the y to take account of the, stretch on the z. Do we need to set up another gradient for it? No, actually we don't, because we can balance the two to maintain volume, so as the overall volume between the two scalings is maintained. And that's real easy to do if we grab a math scalar divide, right? We can take the value 1, divide it by the amount that we're scaling on z, connected to b there, so it's 1 divided by this, and we plug that to the y scaling. And there we go. Super. Right, let's disconnect all three of those. Okay, we can reset value on this bone for its scale, its rotation, and its position. And let's bring this fella down to the negative 40 millimeter mark. Okay, and let's see what we're going to do on the nose now. Well, we'll rotate it down a bit, not a huge amount, so a little bit like that. And we're going to squash it in on the Z this time. We'll shrink it slightly. And we're not going to do any kind of position change. So position can just sort of stay as it is. Okay, this here at the -40, that can just remain at 0. That's fine. For rotation, right, what are we looking at? 5.9. Okay, so let's just plug in the rotation here. We'll see it snaps to 0. We can just grab that key and let's tweak the alpha value until we get to around about 5.9. Almost. Oh, there we are. What's 10.4 look like? Bingo, 596, close enough for me. And then what was the scale that we're wanting? 0.931. So let's plug in the scale. It all goes a bit mental, that's fine. We want this to be 93.1%, 0.931. And what we see, because of course we've factored in the Y, is that it has automatically stretched it on Y as well. And so now we can operate this and bingo, there's our nose wing responding to that movement there. Now let's deal with the trickier one, which is of course how the nose responds when we are pulling on the upper lip, right? How, do we get the movement of the upper lip? Well, we've got a controller here, right, which is of course our main lip control, and that can pull down and that pulls the lip down. Okay, however, it can also rotate on pitch, which pulls both lips down, but of course including the upper lip. But we've also of course got the main lip controllers themselves, and that can be pulling down like this, which is pulling at the lip. And even when we open the jaw like this, that's pulling somewhat on the lip. If you open your jaw really wide, you can, start to feel your nose respond ever so slightly. And then, of course, not also to forget that not only have we got that from when the jaw opens, but of course we've then got the sticky lips, like this, which pulls the lip a different amount when the jaw is open. Now this is starting to get tricksy, because what have we got there? Well, we've got, the main lip, we've got the lip-specific controls, and we've got multiples of them. Of course, what about, we're pulling on this one over here and not that one over there that's going up instead. And we've got the sticky lips and the jaw all to take account of. Are we going to need to take a whole bunch of item infos for all of these control items and somehow figure out a way to put them all together to get this overall effect? Essentially, yes, that is exactly what we need to do. We need to get the combined effect of all these controllers to find out how much exactly the lip has moved by, as in going down. How far away from the nose is the lip pulling? That is going to be a combination of all these controls together. However, let's remember what we've got in our rig already. We've got these bones, that are lining around the mouth like this, that are connecting to the lip to handle the stretch of the moustache area. And these bones respond to everything that goes on in all of those controllers. Therefore, we can find the final position of the lip from them. Specifically, the only ones that we need are the up one right and the up one left, which of course are giving us the lip stretch positions right here under the nose. What do we want to take from them? Well, how about their Z? Because of course they're stretchy bones, so we can simply look at how much they are scaling by, and that will tell us how much the lip has been pulled away from the nose. So what we want to get is item info for the bone, in which case we want to turn to DP kit, where we have got, not instances, where we've got bone info. So we'll add a bone info node here. The object is of course the deform rig, because we've got all of our bones under that deform rig null. The bone, we're going to do the left side here, and there it is, the mouth up one left bone, and here we have its scaling. So let's get the vector scalar node again, take its scaling into that and set it to Z, and now we've gladly got the Z scale of this bone here on the left hand side. So all we have to do is just figure out how much we want to pull our nose by. We can do this pretty easily. Let's just pull that lip down there from the main lip controller. I think it's pretty unlikely to want to come down as much as 10 millimeters, but let's just do it like that for the heck of it, shall we? So minus 10 millimeters. It gives us plenty of range to work with. So when we do that, we want to see what this bone goes to. Let's just unhook all of the inputs to the node there. Just reset it so as we're starting from nothing. And I say we just move it down ever so slightly so as it's pulled. Let's rotate it down a bit like this. And let's scale it in as well so it's similar to what we were doing when we pulled this guy down. For a lip pull like that, I think it might want to go quite a distance. So let's really have it down the face here. Really drag it in so it's really being pulled by that. Okay, so let's just push this off to the side there. Let's grab just one of these gradients, copy and paste it so as we can set up the initial keys. Get our scene editor back up so as we can grab that bone. Okay, and we can see how much it's stretched to. It's 1.573. So let's clear out that key. We want one key here. In fact, let's clear out all three keys because, of course, what we're starting at isn't 0, it's 1. Okay, so let's just set this to maximum 2, okay, and minimum 0. And let's set a key here which is at position 1, so that's when the scaling of the bone is 1. In other words, it's rest scaling. What can this be? Well, let's say that this is going to be our position to start off with, right? In which case we want an output at that point of 0. So it's not moving it when that bone is at scale 1. Then we've got it coming to 1.573. So let's stick in a key, 1.573. Okay. And what's our position here? Perhaps I'll take it down even a little bit more like that. Negative 2.38 millimeters. So 2.38 millimeters. Yeah, multiplied by 100, of course. And negative. Let's grab and make vector again. Make sure we're connecting the input here to that gradient. Plug the alpha to the y. Let's just plug this into position. And what we notice is that something unexpected happens. This jumps back to 0 on the y there. Now, why should this be? Okay, let's look at the vector that's coming out. Okay, we see that it's outputting 0.00238, 2.3 millimeters, right? So that appears correct. We can see the alpha, that's the same here, of course. It's going into the y, and the scalar, that's outputting the correct scale for the bone. Something peculiar is happening. Let's just try hooking the alpha directly, and we see we get nothing there. If we take the scalar and plug that in, well, it shoots off, but it's going to 111. Okay, it's not going to 1.57. If we take the scale from here, from the actual DP node, and plug that into position, again it's at 111, not 1.57. That's kind of peculiar, and we should really be wondering why this is happening. Could it be something to do with using, scaling output? Well, if we take scaling from here, remember this was our NASLab 1 controller, right? Let's just take the scale from that and plug that to position. Well, it goes off to 111, but of course this was at 111 because it's not scaled. So let's just scale it on, let's say, the X here, right? And that comes down to, what's that, 0.42. Okay, let's grab our, where is it? The nose root left. And look at its position here. Sorry, not the nose root, but the nose left. And there it is, 4235. Okay, so that's picking that up correctly. The numbers are what the numbers should be. What is going on? Well, as it turns out, what is going on is the fact that we're not getting the transform at the right point in time. Remember, we're taking from, let me find it again, this stretchy, scaly bone. Yep. How's that being controlled? Of course, this Z scaling is coming from IK. What do we need to do? We need to take the nodal motion and turn on after IK. If we do that, now it's working. So, very important little trick there. You see, the numbers were reporting out correctly because the node network, right, the output of the scale here, remember we're not setting after IK here, we're not setting it at the input time, okay? That's judged at the output node. the output node decides whether to evaluate this network before IK or after IK. The numbers that we see coming out are just, the final numbers, the after IK, the after everything numbers. That's what all of these nodes dish out. When they give out a value, they're giving out the final value, accounting for IK and motion modifiers and anything else that nodal motion can see. Again, this isn't like a problem or a bug or anything, it's just having to know exactly what you're pulling from and where in the evaluation stack that is coming from. So, now that we've sorted that funny little problem, let's just set the scaling of that guy that I used as a test there back to 1, and let's continue with these adjustments. So we've got the position there. What were we also wanting? Well, there's rotation, isn't there? That's at 10.8 degrees, so let's copy and paste this gradient, pop in the scalar, copy the old make vector, plug in the alpha there, plug that into a rotation. Okay, so once again, when it was at scale 1, we're wanting 0 rotation output, and at this scale, well, let's find the value, because again, we're looking for a radian value, so let's just tweak this until we get, I've forgotten what it was now, 10.8 degrees that we're wanting. Back in and twizzling this until it goes to 10.8, 10.75, close enough for me. You see that that's still working. Yes, it is. Good, good. And the last thing, of course, was the scale, and we're wanting it to scale down to 0.846. So let's just copy these guys again. It's wanting now to hook into the Z there. Let's make sure these others are set to 1, of course, because we're talking about scale, not positional rotation. The base for that is 1. Hook in our input here. The output at that key there is going to be 84.6%, like that. Plug that into scale, and there it is. Of course, we can do the divide again to get the Y automatically, so as it stretches out on Y. We'll come back to that in just a moment. For the minute, let's just check we're okay. If we bring that back up, our bone scales up. Why? Because of course this gradient here, it's controlling scale, so this key at 0 needs to be outputting scale 1. So there we go, that's correct now. And there we go, that's working pretty nicely. And of course we're getting it not just for that one controller, we get the same when we're pulling on the actual main lip itself here, and we get it when we're opening the drawer, like that. And of course we get a further effect when we use the sticky lips. We're getting all of this stuff connected together, but whilst only having to reference the one item, which is of course that bone there. So that's really good stuff. And we see that we get it other places as well that we hadn't even thought of, at least hadn't thought of when we initially introduced this, like pulling down on the mouth corner. It's just all interconnected there for us. Just lovely. Now we can ask, do we want, another side adjustment to it? So as, the nose goes up when we push the lip up, or when we, pull the mouth up like this. We could do that. We certainly could. However, if you again check your own face, what you'll notice is that whilst it's pretty much impossible to stop your nose being pulled when you pull your lip down, that happens no matter what you do, unless you shove your finger up your nose hole to hold it in place. When you raise your lip up, or when you, raise your mouth into a smile, sometimes your nose can stay put, and sometimes it'll, raise up. The muscle that you use to pull the mouth here isn't the same as the muscle that you use to pull the cheek. As such, moving up of the lip and up of the nose can be done independently, so we don't want that to forcibly happen automatically. We want to leave that to the animator to control when he wants it. Now, of course, we've got both these effects and we need them both to be happening, don't we? So, how best to take care of that? Well, simply we just need to add them together. And since we've just got scalar outputs at these things, and since we're always affecting the same thing, right? We're affecting the Y position, pitch rotation, Z scaling, doing the same here, Y position, Y rotation or pitch rotation, Z scaling. I can just get rid of these 3 nodes there. I'll get scalar add, I'll get 3 of them, okay? And I'm going to take the position, plus the position, the rotation plus the other rotation, and the scale plus the other scale. Then I can plug that to the position make vector, the rotation make vector, and the scale make vector. Oh, I've produced a wonderful little spaghetti junction of stuff here, haven't I? Yes, I have. Let's not worry too much about that for now. So let's hook in the position and the rotation. And now what we see, okay, so we've got that effect going on there. But then if we pull this up, we get the other effect going on as well. And so like that, you can see that we get this halfway in between combined effect. If we pull the lips down and pull the, the sneer or the naslab up, then the bone does its halfway thing like that. The only problem I'm going to have is the scale. Look what happens. It jumps out to scale, guess what? 2. Why? Because I've added. For each of these controllers, when they're at 0, this scale gradient outputs 1. This scale gradient outputs 1. What I need to do is take one of those scale gradients, not both, just one, and set it to be 0. So as that way I always get 1 plus whatever the other one is. And as a result, but I have to do this in both settings because of course notice that when I pull down, now I'm getting 1 plus, what was the thing here? 84.6, right? Yeah, I was wanting it to go to 84.6. So what I actually want is 84.6 minus 100, okay, negative 15.4. And so now it's getting the 1 from here plus negative 15 from there, which is 84.6. And so I can get both of these things behaving together. And so it gets pulled by one, it gets smushed by the other. And of course the Y channel, or the Y stretch, is of course being compensated for, or at least it will be compensated for, once we take the scale coming from the addition of the two scales and plug that into B. So let's just try and tidy this up so as it looks a little bit more respectable. And there we go, there's our nodes for taking care of that stuff. Now, great as that is, there is still a little further that we can go, which is sort of pulling us into a little bit more complication. But, it's actually, I think, going to be okay. And also it helps us solve a certain problem that we get with this. The problem specifically is just to do with Lightwave's little deferred evaluations and how that messes up in terms of nodes, right? We can see that everything here is working and that's grand, but if I pull the lip down and now I push the naslab up, you see that jump that happens on the bone, and now it's all the way up here. But if I skip frame, now it goes to where it should be. Okay, this is Lightwave failing to fully evaluate the nodes in real time, interactively, properly. It also, of course, comes from the fact that we've got something that's happening before IK, something after IK. Now, on the one hand, this isn't a problem because it will always evaluate correctly. As soon as you move the time slider, right, as soon as that changes, then Lightwave will reevaluate and bingo, it works out at the correct solution. That means that when you are animating, although you won't see this effect happening interactively in real time as you are moving the controllers around, or it'll seem to jump, it won't matter because as soon as you hit play, as soon as you render, it will all be good. It won't have a problem. The other way that you can deal with it, if you're determined to see it interactively, is to of course turn on Studio Live. If we do this, then we find that the thing does respond like this, and when we're then moving this guy, it does what it's supposed to do, but you see it sort of jumps around a little bit whilst it's doing it as the live updater, updates and reevaluates the positions. Studio Live will also just slow down interactivity of your scene overall as it's forcing more evaluations on you. So folk don't always want to use that. Either way, this is a handy setup, and it would be great if we could find a way of doing it that didn't have this problem. And we can. It's just a little weirder and a little bit more work. So let's find out exactly what it is. Well, what it is, it's getting rid of the whole after IK deal and also getting rid of this bone info node. This lack of real-time updates does often more occur with third-party nodes than with native ones. Not always, native ones do suffer it as well. But third-party nodes can be a bit more prone to it because, of course, the makers of Lightwave aren't able to account for all of them all the time. So let's find a new way. What we've still got to do, of course, is get the absolute movement and position of this lip, right? How are we going to do that if we're not referencing the bone? Are we going to go back to referencing multiple controllers and so forth? No. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to add a null. I'll call this nose ref, okay? And what we're going to do with it is we're just going to make it a child of the face root. There it is. And we are going to just position it here, just under the nose. Exactly where you position it doesn't really matter. It could in fact be anywhere in your scene or in the headspace. It makes no odds. But I just like to have it here for helping to remember what it is. And so we'll just hide and lock that because we don't actually need to see it or do anything with it. Neither do we want it to move around. So what do we do? Well, let's get rid of our bone info node here. Let's get ourselves another item info node. In fact, let's get two of them. Okay, this first one, let's point it to the item that we just added there, which should be at the bottom of the list. There it is, nose ref. Okay, and for this guy, second item info, well, what was the bone actually pointing to? The bone was always pointing to this null controller, right? Or it was stretching to it. So that's the up lip one left. So let's find that. There it is, up lip one left, null, of course. Then what do? Well, in math, vector, we get a distance node, and we take the distance from the world position of the ref to the world position of this lip control node, right? We can lose that vector scalar, since of course this is outputting a scalar, and we can plug this into our gradients. So rather than getting the scale of that bone, we're just getting this distance across here. Now obviously this distance doesn't start at 0, and in fact neither did our bone. Our bone started at 1, right? But this now in base at rest is what's that? 0.0165. So let's go through all of these. These first things here, the base position key, you want to set it to that, 0.01656, 0.01656. Okay, we'll just get that. We'll go through the other gradients here and pump that into that base position key. Then how far did this thing come down? It was like 20 millimeters, wasn't it? No, that's way too far. Sorry, it was 10 millimeters. My mistake. There we go. And what's this? Well, this is 0.0239. So for this second key, we can do 0.0239. There we go. We see that that's really shrunk up there. So let's just put this to 0.2 end so we can see our keys a bit better. Even 0.1 by the looks of it. It just lets us see a bit more spacing in our keys. Let's make the same adjustment to our other gradients here and their keys. Okay, so that's the same thing done for all three of those. We see that we're now getting that effect again. That's all operating there as it did. And let's try turning off after IK. We can see that that is working there. And now this works as well. And it's all interactive. We can see that we've got the same going on when we pull on this. And it's interesting that we have got after IK turned off here, because of course, think about it, this null that we're actually getting the position of, yep, that is going towards the mid here, in part based on constraint, which is IK. But the fact of the matter is that by getting the absolute world position of both these nulls, we're able to cheat our way around it. And the consequence is that we don't need the after IK switch on, and we still get all of the same stuff happening like this, but it is fully interactive across both controllers that have an influence on it here. And so we can be really happy with that. And you'll see the other thing is that you can extend this method if you wanted to. At the minute, I'm just interested in, this control here, this single lip controller, right? What if I wanted to sort of have it based a bit on both of these, because maybe that one, when it's pulled down, needs to pull the nose? Well, I mean, you could do something like take another item info here, right, which you'd be looking at the up lip 2 left. You'd be taking another distance from, of course, the nose ref to that guy, and then you could, add both of these together and divide them by 2, or just add them both together and use whatever it was, average them somehow, and that would give you a singular value which represented sort of how far each or other of these were away from that point. And you could do that. You could effectively tie your nose pull across the entire chain of the lip if you were wanting to. For the most part, we don't really need to, and again, if you try it on your own face, you'll find that when you're pulling the outer bit of your lip away like this, it has much, much less effect on your nose. It's generally when you're pulling the main bit of your lip that's right under the nose there that you really start to see the difference. So that's pretty cool. I am going to make one further adjustment, which is I'm going to say that, I think this is a bit too responsive, because of course the nose starts to pull instantly as soon as this comes away from 0, right? What I might like to do is make that not so pronounced. Let me just come down to a level here. I can see my keys spaced out a bit better, yeah. And what I'm going to do is just plonk a new key up here near to the bass key and just drag it out some like that. I'll do the same over here. Let's put a key near to the bass and drag it further down between the two. If you were wanting to be terribly exact, you could make sure that you were getting them at exactly the same, from exactly the same point and moving them to exactly the same point. In this case, I'm just sort of eyeballing it. But of course, the effect that this has is to make it, start much later. Yeah? I get a bit more pull before it really kicks off and finally pulls when I'm going really extreme on the lip here. And so we have very soft effect until it really, really starts to stretch like that. And again, you can tweeze these a little bit just to get them just so and get it performing exactly as you're wanting it to. One of the reasons why gradients and nodes for this kind of automated action are really good, because of course, you can just, you're not having to figure out values and type them all into expressions and update them. You can just, you just grab keys and just nudge them around like this to fine tune the behavior of your little automated adjustments. It's really good. One more adjustment then that will add to the nose wings is to do with the tipping of the lip. Now, of course, I said that when we pull the lip up like this, we don't want the nose to go up automatically because it doesn't have to. However, when we do this with the mouth, that pretty much requires it to, because if you, it's not easy to, in real life, get a twist like this with your own mouth. But as much as you can do it, that sort of goes in with a bit of a sneer. So when we have this, we do want this bone to, do something. What do we want it to do? Well, I guess, we want it to tip up like this and probably mush up like that. Yep. So let's figure that in. Let's see, let's put it about there, shall we? Let's say 19 degrees. Going anything past that is a little bit extreme, I think, even for a cartoon character. Now, in this case, we can just reference this controller directly because, of course, it's the only thing that provides this tipping action. So let's get ourselves another item info node here. In this case, we're looking for the up lip main. And there it is, the up lip main. We're going to want a vector scalar, from which we're going to be taking the rotation. And, of course, we want the bank, which is the Z equivalent here. We can see what that is, of course. It's showing radians. I don't think we need a stretch on this, so we're only going to need 2 gradients. So let's just start out by getting ourselves 1 here. Pop our little scalar into it. We'll do this as the position. So what was the position that we'd sort of keyed this at? Let's call that 1.75, shall we? Right, let's remove a couple of these frames. A couple of these keys, I should say. Let's start your position at 0. at which point you're outputting 0, because this is going to be Y position, and you're going up to, what's that, 0.3316. So, position of 0.3316. Extend this so as we can actually see it. Let's just put that to 0.5. There we are. And what's the output going to be? 1.75 millimeters. It's 0.175 when converted to a percent. So here we have another position to be added. So let's just do that now, shall we? Get ourselves another add node. Take this from there into that one. Grab this guy, pop it all the way up here. There it is. Into the Y it goes. And we want another copy of the gradient here. This is going to be the pitch rotation. How much do we want? Negative 14.1. So let's just turn on nodal motion, plug this straight into rotation. And then once again, because we're wanting to get a radian output, let's just take this until we see down in the channel box there, we've reached negative 14.1 or close enough to degrees. Oh, no, that will do for me, negative 14.5. So there we go. This was our rotation. So let's plug that in there. Get another add node, take the original result into here, take that into there, and of course plug the total result in here. And there we have it. We've now got that effect taking place as well. Whilst of course still maintaining the other stuff that we had going on there. So we can bring it down like this somewhere, once it would have come down, and similarly tip it up. And the whole thing, of course, is operating together. Splendid. So that almost takes care of our nose wing. Almost. We will add a little bit more on shortly. But before we do, let's go over to the central nose, shall we? Because we're going to want to have this adjust itself as well. So what's going to be easy is just to take the nodal motion that we've already got on the wing there, copy it, and just paste it straight on to the main nose. Now obviously we're not going to need all of this same stuff. Some of it is going to be irrelevant, like for instance this first bit that was looking at the NASLab, right? We don't need any of that in here. But let's just unhook everything temporarily whilst we work. So we get rid of that NASLab stuff. Right, what else? Okay, the distance that we're finding between these two. Well, we don't want the uplip 1, we're going to take the mid. Yeah, we're going to take that uplip underscore M. So that's that controller there. Now at base, we see it's a slightly different value, 0.01377. So let's just adjust these gradients. Yeah, 377 on the base key there. Because we obviously have a slightly different distance in play. So let's make sure that we are respecting that. And what are we actually going to want to do? So when this comes down to negative 10 millimeters, we're going to want this guy to do something. So let's just sort of put it where we want it, shall we? So as we can see that. We'll bring it down something like this, I think. And we'll also rotate it down on pitch. I think that seems quite reasonable. We're not going to need to scale it, so we can just dump the scale gradient there. Okay, let's take care of the rotation first. Why not? Let's just plug it straight into the rotation there. Forgotten what value we were looking for. What are we looking for? 6.4. Plug straight in there. Come to this. Get rid of that mid one. And we'll just adjust this until we get to around 6.4. Very good. Now again, create a sort of a staggered medium like that. And then we're also wanting the Y position. And that's coming down to negative 3.942 millimeters. So position 1, once again, get rid of that. So that's 394. Just double check that by plugging it in. Yep, there we go. So this third thing down here, that was scale. So we're not needing that. We are presently only needing one of these add nodes. So let's just get rid of the other one for the time being. And we can hook in position and hook in rotation. And what do we have? Great, we've got the whole nose behaving like this. And of course that's operating with the jaw. You see, of course, the mid one stays put, so it's just pulling at the outers like that. But if we have the sticky lips on, then we've got a full nose motion going like this, which of course makes the chewing action even more clear, does it not? Okay, you notice I've left the uplip main there, so currently when it's banking, that mid nose is going as well, which we don't actually want. So let's just disconnect that at the moment. So there we go, that's now knocked out. But I do want it to do something, and that's when I smush his face off to the side like this. I want something to happen there with the mid-nose. So let's see how far I could conceptually push it. I think that's far too far. Let's find negative 20 degrees, shall we? Okay, that'll be my max. And what do I want my mid-nose to do? Well, I'd like it to come around on its heading some, I believe. I want to come across like this. How much by? I think by this much. A little over half, so let's say negative 14. Now actually, that's really easy, and it's only the one action that I need it to perform. There's nothing else that really needs to make it shift round like that. So I could use a constraint, but I'm not going to, and we'll see why shortly. So what we're getting here is going to be X, so that's the heading rotation of, remember, this item info is the uplip main. And we see that it's going to negative 3.49, negative 3.5. So let's take this to negative 0.5. So neg 0.35. I want this to output, not a position, but some radians, and correct radians to be negative 14. So let's just activate that all up and just tweak here till we get to negative 14. There we go, that's good. But of course we want it to do the same on the opposite side, which is really easy. We just have this key here, which we set to positive 0.35. And what was your value? Negative 24.5. So we set the alpha here to 24.5. And we plug that into the X for the rotation to become its heading. And of course, we only need the one gradient there because we're not translating it at all. What we see the result is that. So our nose now does this as we're mushing our mouth about, which is really nice. And then this is the point at which we're going to start to add the extras. And the reason why I didn't just do that with a simple constraint. So let me get my scene editor, let me add a null, and I'll just call this null nose. Okay, we'll make this a child of the face root. Position it here somewhere in front of the nose. Let's give it a shape like a ball, which only need be quite small. Give it a wee colour. We're not going to need to move it, so we can just turn off its position channels. All we care about is its rotation. Make sure that's reset at 0, which it is. Then what we're going to do is over here in the nodes, get another item info. Okay, this is going to be the nose null. And then we've just got rotation coming from that, right? So let's take a math vector add, and we can take this null's rotation, add it to our gradient driven rotations here, and then plug that in to rotation. And so now we've got the effect from here, but if we're wanting to, we can also have manual control over the nose tip like this. In fact, why don't we allow for position? Can't hurt, can it? So let's just turn on the X, Y, and Z again. Let's come back to the scene editor. Let's just add a new null, call it nose base. You can see clearly what I'm about to do here. Face root, lock it, hide it, make it black. Let's just snap it to the position of the nose there, make the nose a child of it. And then we're able to take another vector add over here, take the position that we've set up for that nose automation, take the position of that null, add it on, and pipe that into position. And so now if we're wanting to change the nose position, we can easily do that. Notice that the Z appears to be reversed. What we have to do is take our nose base and let's just rotate it through 180 degrees on heading. There we go, that puts our nose controller the other way round, but it's still operating in line with the nose there. But of course now the Z is the other way round, so we've got that all nicely there. Now, as a leftover from this, we do have some curious results. There is one in particular that's noticeable, and that's what happens when we do the lips roll. If we go, a bit too far with it, well, look what's happening to our nose wing. Obviously, the null that is being referenced is moving away, the distance is increasing, so it's doing what it's told to do, right? It's moving down. This clearly looks a bit wrong, and it's somewhat unusual. We might expect something like this to happen, but we'd expect it to be going off in that direction. So it would be nice if we could fix that. Now perhaps we could have thought of this in advance, but if you do, wind up setting something up and finding, suddenly there's a collision with something else somewhere, it is nice to be able to try and think through a way to try and amend it without having to, totally reconstruct. It's also very helpful to be able to do this because, of course, whilst you could plan for all of this stuff in advance, it's an awful lot to plan for every tiny little piece. Usually, of course, what will happen is as you go through, building various rigs for characters, you'll learn little things that crop up like that, and so that will, remind you in future when building new rigs of all the little things you have to do. But you still never know when you might get caught out. So let's see what we can do about this, shall we? The solution is actually reasonably straightforward. What we are doing, of course, if you remember, this is the gradient that's outputting the y position based on the distance that we're finding, how far away the lip is from the nose. When we were thinking about that, we were just thinking about the lip pulling down, right? And so we pulled the bone down with it. Of course, if we do think a little deeper, and what discovering this problem helps us to realise is it's not down that we want to be pulling that bone, it's towards the appropriate area of the lip. So here's how we can do it. We've got, of course, the nose ref here, and this item, which is, of course, the lip up 1. If we take a math vector and subtract, then we can take the world position of the lip up 1 and subtract that from the position of the nose ref. This gives us a vector that goes from the nose ref to the lip and points in this direction. All we need to do is to swap this explicit motion in y to instead be motion in this direction. Now this direction as it stands, whilst we have indeed got the vector going from there to there, it is pointing this way. The vector does currently have the magnitude of that distance, so what we need to do is just to turn it into a fixed normal direction, so we're going to normalise it with a normalised node here. Then we've got to think, how much do we want to move this bone by? Well, we already know that. It's going to be the same amount that we were moving it on y. We're just changing the direction. So let's get a multiply node, vector multiply that is. We take the direction we're wanting to move in, and we multiply it by this amount. What we can then do is, right, let's find where this was connecting in. So if I wobble it around, I can see the string coming off of it, and it was going to this add node. So let's unhook that. Now, of course, I was also getting the y from up here. That's what it was being added to. Now, that was, of course, the NASLab, the old sneer control here. That does only need to operate in y, so that's perfectly fine. So we now see that this add node is redundant. We can see where it's going into, which is this one here. This y position that's coming there, that, of course, is from our, turning of this, which we obviously also want to keep. So we can just take this, plug it to there, get rid of that old add node. Okay, so we've now got the turn of this still operating. We've got the movement of that still operating. And so all we want to do, since this is now an x, y and z movement, is get a vector add node, and we're taking that result and adding it on to the explicit y only motion from here. That can then plug in to our position. So what we now see is that when we rotate this, it doesn't just move down, it also moves in other directions. Let's spin around and have a look at this because we'll see a couple of things going on. First of all, we look at it in top view, okay, and we see it's coming forwards. We don't really want that. It should really either go backwards some. And if we look at it from the front, we see that it is going forward in Z. It's going off to the side, which we do want, but not very far. However, the down amount in Y here is correct. That's good. But clearly we need an adjustment on that. And the easiest way to do that is going to be with another multiply node. So let's plug the result of that into here. We'll take that up to where that one was previously plugged in and start off by multiplying it just by 1. So now it's the same as if we didn't have this multiply node in place. And what we'll do is we'll twist the mouth like this to some kind of extreme, and then we'll have a look at where we actually want this to be. So y, we definitely want that to be times 1. The forward motion here, that's the x of that, so let's try x at -1. That pushes it backwards instead, which is good. And the z, well, we want it more off to the side, don't we? So let's multiply the z up more. It's that 5 times. And there we see that now it's pushing around like that. Perhaps that z movement is a bit much, so let's bring it back down again. A little over 3 times. There we go. And so now we've got that. We've still got up and down only from here, and we get additional pull down from here. There we go. A much better system, even if it is a heck of a spaghetti junction of a network. Now, seemingly, we're all good because we've got all that set up, and certainly we've got the setup pretty much done now. However, as we've been putting it together and the values we've been putting in, we have sort of thumbnailed it in, right? And we need to see how this actually properly performs and do any tweaks if necessary. So here I've just, thrown in a crude bit of animation. So we see the mouth and the lips sort of mushing about and the nose is responding to it. And sadly, as we can see, it's, it's not the greatest thing. It looks kind of clunky and lumpy, and it doesn't appear to really be behaving in a way that I like too much. Now, how do we go about, making this better? Well, quite simply, we just need to, start editing the values that we've got in our nodes. We need to edit, the amount of control, really, the, automation. It's like if we'd use Cyclist or something and we'd done a little animated bit, we need to go back and change those keys. Now, of course, to do that, you could find yourself going through, quite a bit of trial and error in, nudging about how all of this goes, in pretty much the same way as we've done when trying to find the values to punch in to set stuff up, right? But what you can do is just do it interactively. And that's the easiest way to do this. So we've got the thing animating away here. I've got the nodes open and I can just start tinkering with them. So let's take something like, well, first of all, we see that the nose tip and the nose wing sort of appear to be operating out of sync with one another, right? So let's open these gradients and say, well, maybe that in-between key that I set here, maybe that was just a mistake. So let's just try taking those out for now, okay? You can always feed some back in afterwards if you want. So let's get rid of those, see if we get an improvement. Okay, it's, it's a bit smoother like that, okay? A little bit smoother, so that's not so bad. What do I think's happening? Well, I think that the nose is, or the nose wing, I should say, I really think it's overreacting. It's just doing too much. It's moving too far. It looked fine when we were just, sort of nudging it into position. It was hard to say, but now that we see it all in motion, it really is just too much. So let's first of all take this movement key here for how much it's moving, and it's pretty simple. We just, of course, the alpha is the output, so we're on the second key here. Yep. So let's just turn it down a bit. Let's turn that down to 0.138. Okay, so that's a bit subtler. Okay, that's good. So I'm happy with that, I guess. Let's have a look now. This is the rotation key. So, of course, that was outputting 0.18 radians. Yep, 18% of a radian. So I think that's just too much. So let's turn that down as well. Let's try it at 1/10 of a radian there. Okay, that's, again, slightly subtler. Not bad. I also think that the amount that it's moving to the side there is a little heavy. So let's open up that multiplier. Remember, I'd multiplied the z by 3 times. Let's just reduce that some, shall we? Let's bring it down to 2.1. There we go. That's, much reduced. A bit subtler there. That's good. And I also think that the z scale that I had going on is too much. So, of course, remember that was shrinking it down when it pulls. Yep, because it's pulling it down. So that was an amount that it's subtracting off. So let's just increase that a bit. Let's just say that it's only taking away, a little 5% there. Okay, that's more like it. Now, of course, it looks like the move to the side is bigger again, because obviously it's not scaling down as well as moving. So let's just reduce this. Let's try it at 1.2. Okay, so now we're getting a much smaller move there and those ways. Okay, I think that's looking better there for the nose wing. Okay, just troubleshooting it directly in animation. Then of course there's what the main nose is doing. So let's grab that guy, come to his motion options and open up his nodes. Righto. Okay, so we've got this whole distance deal going on again. That's when it pulls down. I don't really think that the mid nose needs to pull down anywhere quite that much. So this was the position. Let's grab that second key and let's reduce that. Let's try that at 294. Okay, let's try it a little less still. Let's try it at 224. Okay, that's a bit better. Then we've got the rotation. And again here I was using an in-between. So let's get rid of that and let's set the output to be considerably smaller, about half as much. Okay, that definitely looks better on the down. See, that's much smoother, much cleaner. I can possibly even take it less than that. Let's try it at 4.5. Yeah, that's gentler still, so that's good. And then we've got the roll off to the side, which is of course coming from here because that's looking at the up lip main. And of course we've got it going to left and right, of course. So let's try that at 14, so a little under half. Yeah, that's good. Now see, that's looking much better. So let's fix this on the opposing side there at 14 as well. And so we should now see, there we are, we're getting something that looks a good deal smoother and cleaner. So it's not quite as extreme. Clearly what we've done was just go a little over the top in our, incessant want to push things a bit too much, but by just going through them with the animation on, it's very easy to just adjust the values in the nodes without having to go through a whole ton of trial and error to, try and make sure that you've got the right values going in. So that's real good. We can finally be pleased with that. All that remains is now to do the right nose wing, which is going to be quite simple. We obviously take the nodal motion from the left one, we copy it, come over to the right and we paste it, but we're going to have to make a couple of small changes. For instance, the NASLab 1 left needs to become the NASLab 1 right. So we put that adjustment in and we see, yep, that's now working good. We're still going from the nose ref, but now we're not coming to the up lip 1 left, we're coming to the up lip 1 right. What was this item info down here? That was the up lip main, so that remains unchanged. Of course, we now get it's going up on the wrong side here. Yep, we need it to come up like this. So which of these was the rotation? It was of course the bottom one. And of course what needs to change is simply the input position. So instead of being 0.3316, it needs to be negative 0.3316. Let's just change the scale of our gradient here so that we can see both those keys. Okay, so that's fixed that pretty well. Then we've got the pulling to the side, and that's working as we expect it to, because of course that's working on the distance. Is it, however, going in the right directions? Let's take a close look like this. So we see that it should be going back and out, and this is going back and out. Yep. So the directionality is correct, and that's going down as well, and that's going down as well. And of course when the lip moves down, it goes down. Excellent. And of course it's flexing downwards, its pitch is pointing down, so that's good. And then we can see when playing the animation back, just adjust it so as it's going off for both sides, and there we go, we've got both sides of the nose fully reacting in the appropriate direction. So we are pretty happy with all of that there. So finally we can of course grab those nose bones, lock them and hide them, and of course also go through and just delete out test animation, or leave it in if you want to use later, but of course you will eventually want to get rid of it. And there we go, we've got a nicely reactive face all doing what it's supposed to do. And don't forget, the other thing that you can always do to tweak this out, should you want to, is just to take those nose bones, not the roots, the bones there, and of course you can always, tweak their strength of their effect on the mesh, so as you get a different blend between them and of course the amount of hold from the main nose itself.